Welcome to the latest episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. I'm your host, Graham Hall, joined by my co-host, Zach Goodall, and we are here today to briefly recap arguably the most disappointing loss of the season for the Florida Gators last Saturday's 38-7 defeat in Lexington to a Kentucky Wildcats team that, like Florida, entered the game at 3-5, but certainly looked to be the better team for 60 minutes on Saturday. And then in the second half of this podcast, we're going to talk about Ole Miss, the narrative surrounding Lane Kiffin, and give our predictions of how we see Saturday's game in Oxford unfolding. Zach, let's dive right into it. And kind of like last week when we talked about Georgia, before previewing Kentucky, we're not going to spend a whole bunch of time drilling and reminding you guys about how Florida's most recent contest unfolded, because it was a disappointing affair. Let me just start real quick here with the first half. DJ Lagway throws 3 interceptions. There were 5 turnovers combined in the second quarter. Florida had a chance to go into halftime down just 17-7, even with the Wildcats getting the ball to start the second half. It was more manageable than I think many people thought it was going to be at the time. But then Kentucky scores a late score right before halftime, takes a 24-7 lead into the break, and then just completely just keeps Florida from executing offensively, has its way with Florida's defense, which we're going to talk about here in a little bit. And probably the most notable aspect of the game was that DJ Lagway was benched for Tramell Jones, the first time that Lagway has been benched this season in what has been an overall, not completely, but an overall disappointing year for the former 5-star quarterback out of Willis, Texas. Let's start right there with Florida's defense, though, Zach. From watching the performance, let's just give a little bit of context. Florida's defense has kept the Gators in a lot of games this season, even when the offense has been pretty dismal at times, let me say, when it comes to moving the chains, executing on third down, avoiding procedural penalties. The defense has kept Florida in it. They were in it against Miami there. They were driving down the field in a one-score game in the fourth quarter. They were in it against LSU. The defense continued to fight. They were in it against Texas A&M. You name it. I mean, even against Georgia there, down the stretch, Florida had chances to win that game, and they came out on the losing side in all 4 of them. And against Kentucky, due to the short fields they consistently face, the offense's issues in moving the chains against a good Kentucky defense. I know that maybe that seems like I'm, in retrospect, trying to defend the performance in any way. Kentucky did come in with an impressive defense. We talked about this. They held Auburn the week before to just a field goal. They had been able to get to the quarterback against the Tigers. They had 7 sacks coming into this game. They had 7 interceptions. They proved to be good at getting to the quarterback, rattling the opposition, and getting takeaways for the offense, but the offense had not really executed. Well, they didn't have much trouble executing against Florida's defense. From Zach, watching the game, I just got to get your overall take on the narrative that has been out there. And Billy Gonzalez, this isn't just a fan manufactured narrative or even a media manufactured one, because Billy Gonzalez noted on Monday that the first question he had for his coaching staff was, did you see guys quit in this game? And while he acknowledged that he didn't think that they quit and the coaching staff didn't think that they quit, Florida veteran cornerback Devin Moore came out shortly after Billy Gonzalez and said that the defense was not running to the ball at the rate that they had for the first 9 games of the season, that some effort had declined. And this is semantics in a sense in my mind. You're talking about quitting versus playing with less effort, and some people would make the generalization that playing with less effort is indicative of quitting. With that said, Zach, do you feel that Florida's defense, quote unquote, quit in this game? And was it more of a culmination, if so, of what this entire season has been about, rather than just simply the frustrations of a game that quickly got away from the Gators on Saturday in Lexington?
Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how you could describe it other than it looking like they quit. Even if you're going to say they maybe weren't loafing or guys weren't, I don't know, however you want to say it. It looked like it. Florida didn't create any pressure. A bit of and I know the pass rush hasn't been super consistent, but it was one of the worst performances of the pass rush this year. And as a result, Kentucky was able to be very efficient, maybe not explosive, but efficient in its passing game and take advantage of the short fields that they were given. They also didn't miss a ton of tackles. PFF has them down for missing only 7, which in a game, that's a solid number. So it's not like they were necessarily poor in their technique from that perspective. It more so registers to me as, like Devin Moore said, not necessarily running to the ball as often as they should, as hard as they should. And that is a sign of quitting more than poor play. And it really does go down to, like, if Kentucky weren't gifted as many short fields as they were, this probably doesn't come up as the blowout that it looks like on the scoreboard. While Kentucky probably walks away with a win, in fact, I would say arguably definitely still walks away with a win, you might be looking at a closer margin compared to 38-7. It's hard not to assume that players at least they want to call it not quitting, but at least like weren't going 100%. So however you want to define that, whatever word you want to use to describe that kind of performance, that's exactly what it looked like. And it has to give you concern about how the rest of the season goes. Now, I will hedge here a bit, and this gets a bit ahead of myself because I'm going to talk about this when we get to our Ole Miss predictions. It kind of feels like a classic example of when this team plays tougher competition, they play up to it. When they go against lesser competition, and that's not meaning to totally discredit Kentucky, but the results of their season are what they are. They take a step back. You look at multiple games on this schedule. You look, obviously, none bigger than the USF game. These games where Florida, from an outsider perspective, people would assume Florida's the more talented team. They don't show up. And this game was probably the single biggest example of that, quite frankly, over the entire last 4 years under Billy Napier or under Billy Gonzalez. Florida just not showing up prepared to play and willing to, give the effort required to make it a more competitive game.
Florida's lack of a pass rush has been a bit mystifying this season. I know that Caleb Banks isn't available, but Florida's edge group was consistently defined by former head coach Billy Napier and again by Billy Gonzalez as one of the most talented deep rooms on the team. And heading into Saturday's game, the Gators have just 16 sacks on the season. A year ago, they finished with 40, which was a really impressive number because it was a notable jump from a season ago, but it now feels like Florida once again is unable to rattle quarterbacks. And even a guy like, and this is no disrespect to him, but he's not the most talented quarterback Florida has faced this year. Cutter Boley, a young quarterback who stepped into the starting role when Zach Calzada was no longer deemed to be the appropriate guy there for the Wildcats at signal caller. Cutter Boley was able to have his time in the pocket, go through his progressions, and just find open receivers. And it wasn't, anything dynamic, really. He was just able to take advantage of not facing a ton of pressure. And that is probably one of the more disappointing defensive aspects for me this season, just given the talent that Florida brought back in Tyreek Sapp, Cam James, George Gumbs Jr. The addition of Jaden Woods was so widely heralded. The preseason accolades that he had, the discussions about him being an impact player from the jump. It hasn't resulted in the tackles for loss and sack numbers that many people expected from Florida. And that was indicative. That was a scene on film on Saturday against the Wildcats. It was far from the most disappointing thing in that game, though, in my mind, because again, the reason that the defense was in a tough position most of the night was due to the offense's, quite frankly, ineptitude. They made a lot of mistakes here. DJ Lagway, I don't want to say he regressed, but he continued to make the mistakes that have become very frustrating for him, reading defenses, making errant throws, throwing into double coverage. It resulted in 3 first-half interceptions that, again, made the defense have to defend a short field. And Billy Gonzalez did something that we haven't seen this year. He pulled DJ Lagway, choosing to have him watch the remainder of the game from the sideline. Steve Spurrier Jr. was seen consistently talking to Lagway, going through the film, coaching him up on the sideline as Tramel Jones Jr., the freshman quarterback, made his second appearance of the season. Remember, he played the second half in Florida's season opener against Long Island University. So this was his first Division I contest, his first road game of the year for the for the Mandarin standout who was previously committed to Florida State. He wasn't able to lead Florida down the field to score either, which I think begs the question coming into this game at who Florida will play at quarterback for the first series against the Rebels on Saturday. If Jones Jr. had been efficient and been able to lead Florida to scoring drives, I think that you would have this intense debate about who gives Florida the best chance. Billy Gonzalez has been non-committal when it comes to who he is going to play at signal caller against the Rebels on Saturday. But he did say on Monday that he expected Lagway to take first team reps in practice. I can confirm that is what occurred. Tramel Jones Jr. has continued working with the second team offense, but it still begs the question of who you're going to see out there. And if it is Lagway, how short of a leash is he going to have on Saturday? Is it going to be 1 or 2 interceptions? Or if he's unable to execute, he's unable to be a willing runner and execute against a really good Ole Miss defense that we're going to talk a little bit more here in a few minutes, is Florida going to quickly make a change and go to Tramel Jones Jr. before the game gets out of hand? Zach, I want to get your prediction on what you think happens on Saturday at signal caller for the Gators. Do they start DJ Lagway or Tramel Jones Jr.? And if it is Lagway, how short of a leash do you think that he'll have against the Rebels?
Yeah, it's tough to get a gauge as to what the leash will be when you consider the context of Tramel Jones and the theory that he might burn a red shirt. You play him against Ole Miss and make him your starter the rest of the way, he's a true sophomore going into next year. Is that something the staff particularly cares about, considering they're on their way out? Maybe not, but in public, Billy Gonzalez is at least saying they are like actively trying to do what's best for the players, and that includes preserving some red shirts in some cases. You know, the subject at hand was Tank Hawkins, obviously, and him opting out of the season. But it applies to someone like Tramel Jones. And that gives me pause. That does make me wonder, okay, like even if Lagway has a really bad performance, will they just stick with him? So then in theory, you could play Tramel Jones the last 2 games and he would get his red shirt. I'm not sure. That said, I wholeheartedly believe DJ Lagway will be the starter. If you're giving him the 1 reps and he's continued to receive them throughout the week, I don't really see a way in which they would suddenly flip it on Thursday and say, okay, well, actually now Tramel's going to get the reps for 1 practice and a walkthrough, and then we're going to throw him out to the Wolves in Oxford, not even at home. So I do wholeheartedly believe he will be the starter. And I don't know. It's interesting. I think about this. Someone mentioned this the other day at the press conference. Like this is definitely the first time that DJ Lagway has been benched like in his life, right? I mean, obviously that would not have happened at Willis. I would imagine that didn't happen in middle school. I just don't, with everything that he had going for him as a coveted high school recruit and someone coming out of the prep level, this is probably the first time he's ever been benched. What does that do to his psyche? Their perspective is that they wanted to give him a breather, allow him to refocus, and hopefully he can apply some of the lessons he's learned from just taking a breath to come out with a better game this upcoming week. On the opposite side, what does that do to you? If you've got all these sky high expectations and you are benched for the first time in your life, will that make a problem even worse? And I'm not trying to like justify the concept of he shouldn't have been benched. I think I said after like week 3 on this show that I thought it probably needed to happen, just at least for the short term until he gets back up to speed. But what does that do? I don't know. If he ends up coming out and having 4 or 5 interceptions similar to the LSU game, while I would understand the prospect of trying to preserve the red shirt for Tramel Jones, you don't really have a choice at that point. And it does beg the question, shout out you, Graham, for asking this of Billy Napier a long time ago. Do you, even if, because like at that point, you obviously they would be getting 3rd team reps, and that makes it even more disadvantageous for their like chemistry with the receivers and ability to operate the game plan compared to Tramel Jones. But do you go to Aiden Warner, to Harrison Bailey, to one of these backup options, whether it's in this game or maybe in the next 2 games, if you end up having to pull DJ again, and that time maybe it's a for good, not for good. I'm not trying to say that his future at Florida would be done if he gets benched, but at least for the rest of the season, do you consider alternatives in order to Tramel Jones's eligibility? It's a confusing situation, but all of it being said and done, the easiest way I can put it is I do think DJ Lagway will be the quarterback who steps out onto the field in Oxford this Saturday.
Yeah, I caught a good bit of flack earlier in the season for asking about whether Aiden Warner or Harrison Bailey deserved a look, and I used the word
And in hindsight,
experience.
in hindsight, I think you were on to something.
Yeah, someone texted me last night and said never wrong, just early. You know,
Yep.
I don't know if that's going to happen on Saturday. What I meant by the poorly worded question at the time was, is it more worthwhile to play one of the aforementioned quarterbacks who has taken more first team reps this year in 2025? Maybe not have more in-game experience, but Aiden Warner and Harrison Bailey took more first team reps than both Tramel Jones Jr. and DJ Lagway in spring camp. And then with Lagway's injury in the fall, the calf strain, Tramel Jones Jr. was still working his way up the depth chart, took some second team reps, but you still saw Aiden Warner and Harrison Bailey battle for some first team reps with Lagway being unable to go in practice. So in terms of who has taken more first team reps, back in week 3, you could have said it was Bailey or Warner. Now, with Lagway's health having improved, him really taking a lot of good on good, 11 on 11 first team reps since the first bye week of the season, it is probably Lagway who has had the more practice time. And that's why I do still believe that Florida will continue to ride Lagway heading into this game as the starter. But I do think his leash is going to be a little bit short. If it's a 7-0 game and he's thrown 2 interceptions and you're trying to keep the defense motivated and still remain in this game and have a chance in the fourth quarter at a stunning upset, you probably would be more well-suited for a game-managing quarterback, one who's not going to really take you out of the game with some decisions. So I do think that Lagway will be out there for this first snap on offense for Florida on Saturday, but I'm interested to see how he does because I do think it will dictate how long he plays in the contest. Now, with all that said, this will be our first prediction of this podcast before we get into a little more talk about Ole Miss. Everything we just talked about from Florida offensively and defensively, from DJ Lagway to the defense's overall performance, you kind of already alluded to this about Florida playing better against more talented competition. Do you think that's going to occur on Saturday, or is this too hard for them to wash out and come into this game motivated, given what they've dealt with? That they're playing for bowl eligibility, but it seems like it's pretty much going to take it's going to be a very tall task to get to bowl eligibility, given that Florida plays at Ole Miss this weekend and then closes the season with Tennessee and then against Florida State in the season finale. Are you expecting that both Lagway and Florida's defense are going to have a better performance in this game on Saturday, given their ability to bounce back, wanting to play for the patch, the logo, all these things, but also, this is the kind of curveball I'm throwing at you. Many people have talked about this game as being a potential audition for Lane Kiffin, in a sense. You're going out there and you have a chance to put something on film and give him a sideline level view. If he's going to be Florida's head coach, is that any motivation for Florida that could allow them to have better individual performances along with the narrative? The players may say that they don't pay attention to the outside noise, and they were asked on Monday about the narrative surrounding Lane Kiffin, as was Billy Gonzalez. The players are certainly aware of the timeline and how the timing would have to work out for Lane Kiffin, how if they win this game on Saturday, they more than likely are in the college football playoff and most likely hosting a playoff game on December 19th or 20th in Oxford. Florida has a chance to play spoiler, and they have a chance to hinder Ole Miss's chances of making the college football playoff. Do you think all these factors we just mentioned and talked about are going to lead to better performances for the Gators on both sides of the ball?
Yeah, I hate you mentioned that the audition angle because I had my intro ready. I was looking around for tinfoil so I could put on my tinfoil cap. The players know that Lane Kiffin is at least outwardly, and we don't know what they know inwardly, but they're saying as much that they hear the rumors about Lane Kiffin being primary target, coveted target, number one guy, and I have no reason to believe that any of those rumors aren't true. We've reported for weeks now at 247 that there is alignment on Lane Kiffin being the number one target. So yeah, absolutely. I think that there would be a motivation on players who have eligibility and would like to stay at Florida at a minimum to not put up the kind of tape and lack of effort that we saw against Kentucky. I think that we'll see full effort because this is an audition. And maybe they shouldn't treat one game that way because every game is available on tape. But it would be hard for me to believe that there wouldn't be a little bit of extra motivation from that perspective. And now when it comes to playing spoiler, I think that that is a motivation for any team when you're going into a game against a highly ranked opponent. I guess what I wonder, and I probably would not believe this, is if let's imagine that the players want Lane Kiffin, right? That they are like, oh yeah, we want this to be our guy. I can't really imagine that players are looking at it as like, oh, if we win, then that helps our chances of getting Lane Kiffin by knocking them out of the college football playoff race. Or not that it necessarily would, but it helps that case. I just think that that could be a little too far thinking on their end when they obviously have tasks at hand right now. But who's to say? Maybe there are some players that are thinking that way. It would be interesting to say the least. But all that said, largely because of the motivation to put good things on tape against someone that is being considered a candidate, and simply to keep putting good things on tape. And again, to the point that I think Florida has played up to its higher ranked competition and more talented teams. I don't think we're going to see a game like the Kentucky game. Is that me expecting Florida to win? Absolutely not. I don't think much of a chance of that, and I will not be picking Florida for this game. But I don't see a blowout occurring. I think that doesn't mean they'll play close like they did against Georgia. But for example, I think the spread right now is 14.5. There's a world in which Florida covers, I think. That might even be what I end up going with for my prediction, that Florida at least covers 2 touchdowns. Now, what that looks like, could it be a garbage time score to backdoor it? I don't know. But one way or another, I don't expect something like 38-7. I would think that Florida at least will play a bit closer and make this competitive, make it worth watching, I guess is probably the best way to put it. Just given what's at stake here, and knowing that, again, they do seem to have a tendency to play up in a lot of the higher competition games than, say, Kentucky, USF, and so on.
Yeah, I think the only reason why any player would be interested in the timeline or invested in it, I guess I should say, they all have agents. They have people who are looking, at the landscape of college football, and they're well aware of the portal rule changes, right? There's going to be overhaul of Florida's roster when this season comes to an end, when a new head coach is announced. Florida more than likely will have 2 portal windows. They'll have one 5 days after the head coach is announced, and they'll have one from January 2nd to January 16th, which is going to be the lone portal window in 2026. With that said, if you're someone who has not made up a decision on their future, the best chance for you to be at an ideal landing spot next year is for that portal to open sooner before other teams fill out their classes. So the sooner that Florida hires a head coach and announces it, they may, in theory, come to an agreement with Lane Kiffin behind the scenes, and he may continue to coach through the college football playoff, which could be a semifinal game in early January. And then players on Florida's roster, not to say that they're stuck, but they're not able to officially enter the portal. Now, that doesn't mean things won't happen behind the scenes. Discussions always occur. You can use the term tampering, whatever you want to call it. But the portal wouldn't officially open. So anyone looking to leave and maybe have a chance to go to another SEC team or any Power 4 team, they would benefit from Florida being able to publicly announce a head coach sooner. And one way to do that and it be Lane Kiffin is to knock the Rebels out of the college football playoff. Now, they're obviously going to need some help from another team down the stretch here, so it's not all entirely in their control, which makes this possibility, this theory even that I'm discussing, a little bit, you could even say far-fetched, but I would say unlikely. But it is an interesting point of discussion given the portal rule changes, given the discussion surrounding Lane Kiffin and what Ole Miss has to play for. So now looking a little bit at what Ole Miss has to play for. This is a team that retooled, lost some pieces to the NFL. Jackson Dart now with the New York Giants, Trey Harris over with the Los Angeles Chargers. They don't look like they've really missed a beat, and it's part of why Lane Kiffin is being discussed as one of the top head coaching candidates, potential head coaching candidates, I guess I should say, in college football, because he's been able to reload this roster. Now, there are some areas where they haven't been as good this season. Looking at their defense, yeah, they've been really good at pressuring quarterbacks, but they come into this game with just 21 sacks on the season. I say just because last year they finished third nationally in sacks with 52. Now, you look at who the standout for them is. This is the name that is going to be a little bit familiar in at least one way for Florida fans. Their leader in sacks coming into this game is Prince Will Umanmielen, the younger brother of Princely Umanmielen. He has 4.5 sacks on the season. They've been really good in the trenches. They have really good play at linebackers. They're led in tackles by a linebacker, and they've been good at forcing the football out. They come into this game with 5 forced fumbles on the season, averaging nearly 1 every 2 contests, and they've recovered 3 of those 5. You look at their offense, there was a lot of hype coming into this game into the season about Austin Simmons, a former Florida commit, a 2-sport athlete with the Rebels, also plays for Ole Miss's baseball team. He got injured earlier in the season, and rather than that ruin their trajectory and lower their ceiling, they turned to little-known Trinidad Chambliss, who has been fantastic this year. He comes into this game with more than 480 yards on the ground. He has more than 2,300 passing yards. Their offense has nearly 3,000 yards between the play of their quarterbacks coming into this game. They have more than 3,000 receiving yards. They have 5 receivers who have more than 390 receiving yards coming into this game, which is impressive considering the talent that they lost at wideout and at tight end after last season. This is a really well-balanced team. And in the backfield, they're led by Kawan Lacey, who is very close to exceeding the 1,000 rushing yard mark. There's a really good chance he does it in this game. He also has 134 receiving yards, so more than 1,000 all-purpose yards already through 9 games up there in Oxford. This is a well-balanced team, and I think you look at the challenge that they pose. It's going to be difficult for Florida to slow them down, considering how good they are in all 3 phases. I also should mention that they are 19 of 21 on field goal attempts this season. And like Trace Mack, their place kicker has not missed an extra point this season. So playing at home, this is going to be an arduous, difficult contest for the Gators to overcome, given the talent that Ole Miss has. With all that said, Zach, I'm going to put you on the spot first before I give my prediction. Unlike Zach, I'm actually going to give you the score prediction that I have decided. I already gave it to Neil McCready when we did our Behind Enemy Lines question exchange. You can read my answers at Rebels247 Friday morning. We're recording this podcast Thursday morning, so you can read those answers Friday morning when I talk a little bit more about the conversation surrounding Lane Kiffin, DJ Lagway, and how I think this game unfolds. You can also read our predictions tomorrow with Zach's official score prediction over at Swamp247, along with Tyler Harden, our great recruiting writer's prediction of how this game will unfold. But Zach, with all that said, how do you see this game playing out on Saturday night in Oxford? And you already said you thought it's going to be a little bit close. What do you think it's going to take for Florida to keep it close and maybe have a chance at pulling out an unlikely upset on Saturday night?
You know what? Despite you, I'm going to give a score prediction. Let's go.
I did it.
You did it.
I bullied you into it.
You did. I mean, I don't like when you hear this, it's not close, right? But I do think that they will, I don't know. Again, they could backdoor it. They could play Ole Miss close, and then Ole Miss really pulls away here. But I'm going to go with the current line's 14.5. I will have Florida covering. I will go Ole Miss 31, Florida 17, I think is the way I'm going to go. So not particularly close, but better than the Kentucky game. I think that, yeah, this offense is extremely dynamic, and it's hard for me to have confidence that Florida, while I do think it will come out defensively more motivated and play a better game than it did last week, just based on what you see last week, hard for me to say, oh, well, they'll come out and get their job done against one of the best, if not the best offense in the country, certainly in the SEC. It's just, it would be hard. It would be crazy of me to suggest that they'll have easier pickings against Ole Miss's offense at this point, but they need to. If there's any chance of Florida winning this game or at least keeping it close from start to finish, they need to create some turnovers. They certainly need to generate more pressure. They need to be careful about the quarterback run game when they are trying to create pressure. They can't get off their keys and break contain, allow Chambliss to go and make plays with his feet. I don't think they have the most dynamic receiving core. I think that it's one that gets the job done with a very good quarterback, and that pairs with a very dynamic, hard to read run game with the quarterback run threat. And obviously Lacey being as explosive, and, he's scoring basically 2 touchdowns per game this year, or coming close to it. It'll just be hard to slow down. And ultimately, while Florida's defense needs to stand out, will come down to DJ Lagway having a far cleaner game, not setting the defense up on short fields, and putting points on the board. They got to start fast, kind of like they did against Georgia. I think that that's going to be crucial to go out and put 7 points on the board on their first drive. I think that is absolutely necessary. Am I totally confident in it? Obviously not, but that's a key in this game. Is you got to go out and put points up immediately and make Ole Miss either chase you or not feel comfortable with potential early lead as this game gets going. But yeah, at the end of the day, it would be irresponsible of me to pick Florida or suggest that Florida can make this close, really, and threaten Ole Miss is the way that I would put it. So they'll win comfortably, but I will at least give Florida the benefit of, I think they cover, unlike last weekend.
Hey, well, coaches and players may not do moral victories, but shout out to you, Zach, for 2 moral victories right there. Florida to cover the 14.5-point spread and not have as bad of a performance as they had against Kentucky. That's like when you give someone a backhanded compliment and say, you're not as stupid as I thought you were. So shout out to you for that prediction. I'm all in favor of it. Maybe the board will be a little bit kinder to you for that prediction.
I'm doing my best Billy Napier impression.
I respect it here. That's what fans are looking for, I'm sure. I'm a little bit more down on Florida's chances heading into this game. I think it's going to be tough for Lagway to have a better performance. I do subscribe to the theory that Florida has played tough competition better than they have played inferior competition, I guess you could say, or more close to their level of talent competition. I do think that Florida has done a really good job at not pointing fingers, not splintering, not looking to the future like we theorized, or like I theorized really in the first half of this podcast. I think they've done a good job focusing on the moment. There's a lot of leaders in the locker room, from Austin Barber, Jake Slaughter, Tyreek Sapp, who are going to hold the team accountable and are trying to play their last few games of college football at a high rate. And they're going to want to try and go out on a good note, whether that's making bowl eligibility, playing spoiler to Ole Miss, defeating their in-state rival, Florida State, or their conference rival in Tennessee in the final 2 games. Whatever it is, I think that Florida still has things to fight for. But you look at how much talent Ole Miss has. You look at what they're playing for, a spot to not just be in the college football playoff, but to host it, which would be massive for the fan base in Oxford. I think that, yes, Lane Kiffin has sometimes coached down to the level of competition. That you go back to last year when Ole Miss was still in the college football playoff conversation, even though they had 2 losses. They came into Gainesville last year and lost to a Florida team that had a tough first 3 months of the season, really. And then they came into November and played a lot better against LSU and then against Ole Miss. And you saw some disappointment there from Lane Kiffin in Gainesville last year. I don't think that's going to happen on Saturday. I think that Ole Miss is going to be the better team. They are the better team. I think this is going to be a game that they win by more than 3 touchdowns. I think Florida will have its chances. I could see them scoring on the scripted drive to begin the game, but I think Ole Miss will adjust defensively. I think that they're going to get to DJ Lagway. They're going to rattle him. He is going to make a couple of turnovers, not just 1 interception. I think that Florida is going to struggle in this game. and I went with 35-13 Ole Miss victory on Saturday, eliminates Florida from bowl eligibility. So we will see how it plays out. I will be up there in Oxford for the first time to see this game in person. I'm really looking forward to getting up there and crossing Ole Miss's stadium off my bucket list in the SEC. The list is getting shorter of programs that I have to go and visit. And if you're looking for something to maybe get over the disappointment, if that does occur on Saturday, let's talk a little bit quick Florida basketball. The Gators opened the season last week with a loss to Arizona, but have bounced back with a pair of victories. First against UNF a week ago, and then on Tuesday night against Florida State, 78-76. And now the Florida Gators face another in-state rival on Sunday night in Jacksonville at 8:30 p.m. in a much improved Miami Hurricanes team. I will have a preview of that. We'll have some coverage as well, doing live updates over at swamp247.com. We'll be talking to Todd Golden and a player a little bit later today. So look for some basketball coverage less than 24 hours after the end of the Florida Ole Miss game over at Swamp247. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Swamp247 podcast. For Zach
Actually,
Goodall,
wait. Sorry to cut you off. Buddy. Dude, can we get one more note in here about football, only because you mentioned the next 2 weeks?
Do it.
I think it's important for anyone that was not on Swamp 247 late Wednesday night to know that we were first to report after defensive tackle Caleb Banks was listed doubtful for this game. First time since he underwent surgery on his foot, which you reported in September was not done at UF, was done under James Andrews, or one of his people. He was moved from out to doubtful for the first time. I've been told by multiple sources he's trying to come back for those last 2 games. You mentioned if Florida, obviously they lose bowl eligibility if they lose this weekend, but let's say that they somehow win and they're looking toward that. I think it makes the chances even greater. But one way or another, Banks is fully healed from his foot injury, and he is trying to get back onto the field here in these next couple of weeks. He's going to the NFL draft. I think that's the idea of him medically redshirting is not something that's going to happen. He expects to play in a prospect all-star game, but he would be going into that without having played football since September and potentially out of shape. So he has returned to practice. He's getting back into football shape, and he is motivated to at least take the field one more time with his teammates at Florida. Just wanted to drop that nugget. Only remembered it because you mentioning the next 2 games. It's something worth monitoring here over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, we'll see if he's available on Saturday against Ole Miss, or is able to play at any rate against Tennessee or Florida State. It certainly would help a Florida defensive front that, like we talked about, has been a little bit disappointing this season. So that'll absolutely be worth monitoring. We'll get availability reports tonight, Friday night, and 90 minutes before kickoff on Saturday. And if he's not available for this weekend's game, continuing to see his progress and whether he can play against the Volunteers or against the Seminoles is certainly worth monitoring. But again, that's going to do it for this episode of the Swamp 247 podcast. For Zach Goodall, I'm Graham Hall, and we'll see you next time.